We're going to talk now about data and privacy. We live in an age where data is quite simply a valuable resource, particularly our own individual personal data. And this is only going to increase with the advance of new technologies and innovations. So the big question in this area is, how do we keep our personal information safe? And what are those companies and organizations using our data doing to keep it safe? Plus, there are authorities as well to monitor this activity. How are they keeping us safe? We hand out so much personal information and put it out there on the internet, don't we? So it is a pertinent question now and, of course, for future generations, because people are getting online younger, quite frankly, than we ever did. So to talk about this, I'm joined by the Information Commissioner, John Edwards, and by Crystal Palace footballer Leigh Nichol. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for coming down to our big event here today. There's so much going on and so many important issues in this field, but this is a particularly pressing one, it feels, with so many young people getting online now. Leigh, I want to talk to you first about your experience. This has very personal resonance with you because you were the victim of intimate image abuse. Talk to us about what happened.
Yeah, so in 2019, I received a link on Instagram that led to me opening, and it was a file with 7 or 8 videos of me when I was 18, when I made, now looking back, the worst decision of my life to record myself in a very private moment with another individual. And I found out about that when I was 23, so the videos were 5 years old that I completely forgot about. I didn't know they existed anymore. In that moment, when I clicked on that link, my life literally came crashing down, and I've never experienced pain, shock, guilt, anything like it before. No one can ever prepare you for that moment. In that moment, I lost the most expensive thing in my world, and that was my privacy, and there was nothing that I could have done about it because it got so much attention. It went viral worldwide. It was trending on websites that you should never be trending on unless you want to. It came with a lot of social media abuse, and that's all still out there to a degree. If anyone wants to, unfortunately, find it, they'll find it. And I think initially, for the first 6 months, for me, it was about surviving, keeping myself here and present and breathing. It wasn't really about anything else in life. And the most difficult moment within it all was having to tell my family, because it's not just me that went through it, it was my family, my loved ones. And still, to this day, that's the thing that I struggle with most, because it wasn't just the damage done to me, it was the damage done around me and my family, my friends, worrying that I wouldn't survive it, because many people don't survive this thing.
Yeah. You went through personal trauma that you will have to deal with for the rest of your life. You've been very honest about this, and you've come out of the worst of it, you feel, but as you've been very honest in saying, it's something that you and your loved ones have to live with. But since this happened to you, you've been on a learning curve, because as far as you know, these images, these videos, these personal, that were on your personal device, you deleted them. But your iCloud was hacked. And, the learning curve for you as to how that happened, because so many people here today and watching us online or on TV, we're very naive in that respect. We have all these pictures on our phone and we know they go somewhere up there for storage. But you went on a learning curve as to how this can happen, how easy it is to happen.
Yeah, I think for the vast majority of people that this kind of crime happens to, there's an individual responsible, someone they know of. But for me, it's still hard for me to get my head around that. That email address that I set up in 2008 when I was at school is the email address that ended up ruining my life about 14 years later. And you're never taught that, especially when I was at school, starting up my first MSN account or Facebook account. I never thought for 1 minute that email address, years and years and years later, would be the cause of my trauma. So I didn't know that once you delete things off your device, it's still there somewhere.
It's still a digital footprint.
Yeah, like now when I say it, it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like common sense. But honestly, back then, no one told me that make sure that you then sign onto your iCloud on a different device to then remove it. I wasn't aware of two-factor authentication at the time that gives you that extra security to make sure no one can get into your iCloud. That was probably the main learning curve. I had no idea that these videos still existed, but they did, and I'm sure that a lot of people listening today will be like, I've got a picture that I would never want anyone in the world to see. It could be something like a bikini picture, it could be your passport photo, it could be absolutely anything.
It could be an innocent photo of your children. You just don't want the wider world to see it.
And for me to think that it's there somewhere,
Yeah.
it still blows my mind now.
It's a really daunting thought, I think, for most people. I'm going to ask John a question in just a moment, but you have all got QR codes, so if you do want to send a question into this panel, please scan that QR code and send us. And for those watching us elsewhere, go to Twitter, #BigIdeasLive22. John, where do you come into all of this? Because the problems that Leigh has faced is something that you get involved in. As Information Commissioner, what is it that you do to help people like Leigh and everyone here stay safe online?
Thanks, Sarah Jane. First, I just want to say how much I admire Leigh and her bravery in telling her story, because it's not easy. And I think one of the things we've got to get past in society is victim blaming and the shame that people feel when they are the victims of these malicious actors who are taking advantage of security flaws to steal our most intimate moments. That's reprehensible. So at the Information Commissioner's Office, we administer laws that are intended to protect Leigh and everybody else in the community and their personal data. The one that people will most know of is called the UK GDPR. It's the General Data Protection Act. And it says that platforms and organisations that hold data have to keep it secure, and they can only use it for the purposes for which it was obtained, and they have to be transparent about those, and things like that. So we deal with complaints. The matter that Leigh dealt with, that was a criminal matter that should have been investigated by the police. But people have rights also to get data deleted when a platform should no longer be holding it. So we are also committed to trying to make the online environment safer by enforcing these security standards. We're trying to provide education in the same way that Leigh's doing today by telling her story. We're also working with industry to make the online services safer for children, and that's a really big thing for us. So we've got a law called the Age-Appropriate Design Code. We call it the Kids Code. But it says if you're pointing digital services towards children, and children are likely to access your services, you've got to design your service with privacy in mind as a default. So switch off location tracking, disable messages from people who aren't contacts, make the posts private by default. So it's stuff like that. It's getting organisations to think about how the individuals could be harmed and to try and avoid the kind of experience that Leigh's had.
Yeah, Leigh, I know you use the bad experience you had for good use, because you talk to young people now about the perils of putting their information online. I mean, everybody in this room will have put their name, address, telephone number, email, date of birth into a website somewhere. That's just how it works. What advice do you offer young people? Because obviously that kind of data has to be out there nowadays, but when it comes to their own very private data, pictures, who they talk to online, what message are you telling them?
I think the obvious one for me would be don't do it, but I can say that because I've made the mistake myself, but I think that's unrealistic. It's 2022, so it's if you are an individual and you're in a relationship and you feel like this is a big part of it, it's about making sure that you have got the correct things in place to protect yourself. And the framing behaviours that I always speak to, and we at my company speak to other people and clients and kids about, is being risk-averse, being respectful, and being defensive. And by those three behaviours, you won't often go wrong in life because we can't control the platforms and what they do and criminals that are looking to expose other individuals. But what we can control is control our own behaviour and making sure that we're not putting ourselves too much at risk. If you feel the need to share an image, for example, take your identity out of it if it's a really crucial part to your relationship, or it's something you really, really want to do, take your identity out of it, because then you're not dealing with public humility and victim blaming and all of those things. So it's about being defensive and not taking too many risks in life and just always being a good person for me.
John, how prevalent is hacking and the experience that Leigh went through? Because, you know, I've lost count of the amount of times over the last year I've had alerts saying that a password I've used has been compromised in a data leak. And at one point, it was happening so often, you know, changing passwords all the time. Just how easy is it to hack, and how exposed is our data?
It's really hard to know how prevalent hacking is. But what we do know is that the experience that Leigh's had of a malicious third party accessing an iCloud account, those are relatively rare.
Okay.
Most of the breaches occur by accident, and we see this every day. Businesses failing to do the basics, putting everyone's email address in the CC field rather than the BCC.
Yeah.
It's basic stuff like that. It's training staff to make sure that if they get a suspicious email, they don't click on the links. And this stuff sounds so basic, Sarah Jane, but it's so often neglected. We fined an organisation £4.4 million for failure to take those basic steps, which led to the exposure of 113,000 employees' sensitive personal information.
How much harder is your job going to get? Because, you know, the ICO, you're there to protect people, but you're also there to promote data-led innovation. It's not all bad. You know, the data can lead to great things, as we're showcasing here at Big Ideas Live. So if collecting data is going to be a more powerful tool, just how tricky is the protection element of it going to be in the future?
Well, we're there really to make sure that we can get, as a society and as individuals, the benefits from the wonderful innovation and these tools. They're fantastic. We all love our phones. We all love the online services. But we shouldn't have to compromise our privacy for that.
Yeah.
So I kind of reject the language of trade-off. Can you have innovation or privacy? We're entitled to both. So we're there to try and make sure that businesses are enjoying the benefits, they're getting the innovation, but they're doing it in a safe way that respects our data, in a way that recognizes that it's not this anonymous data, it's about a live person.
Yeah.
And that person is entitled to expect that their data is protected.
For many people, it will be an inconvenience. It will be having to change your password, having to call up your bank, having to do various different elements like that. But for you, Leigh, it's as serious as it gets. You were the victim of a crime. So I'd be quite interested, and I think a lot of people here would be as well, is how do you go about reporting and dealing with a cybercrime? Because if something happens to you in real life, there's a clear set of structures that everyone in this room will know. You go to the police, you go through the legal system. What was that experience like for you? Is it clear cut? Do enough people know about what to do if they're a victim of hacking, for example, in your case?
No, all I can speak about is my own experience, and it wasn't an easy procedure. It wasn't straightforward. There was no step 1, 2, 3, 4. My initial reaction was actually to call 999. I thought it was the biggest emergency in the world to me at that point. But when I did speak to the police, unfortunately, I don't think they have the resources or the training in place to really handle such a sensitive topic. It's not new, but it's happening more and more and more, and our police don't have the resources or the training to be able to manage it effectively. It took way too long for the process to really start. And I must say, the police, for me, they were great emotionally, but in terms of the physical support, there's not much. Now I've learned there's not much any of us can do other than just take the punches as they come and just accept that it's now out there. There isn't much support that our authorities can offer. Once it happens, we're reacting to it. But that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now, to try and help, unfortunately, future victims have a more clearer step-by-step process. There is people out there that can help get it removed from your Googles, from Safaris. But one thing I would say is these things take time. It does not happen overnight. It does not happen immediately. And my expectations were, my videos are out there. I want them taken down with a click of a button. I'm 3 years on, and I've got people that manage my Google and my social media platforms every week to get them taken down. And that costs people a lot of money, and the general public don't have the kind of money that it takes.
Yeah. I mean, John, you are all about holding those organisations and companies to account. You mentioned some of the common mistakes they made, but you also are about protecting the individual, particularly the vulnerable, about equipping them with how to operate safely online. What is the biggest mistake people make when it comes to their own personal data?
That's a really hard question. Let me flip it. There's an obligation that all organisations have, which is called data minimisation. And that means they should be looking at what information they're collecting about people and only collecting the minimum amount they need to provide that person with the service. I think if, as individuals, we thought about data minimisation and only giving out what was really necessary, that would be a help. But I do think it's also it's a mistake to load the blame on the users of this technology. It's a mistake to say Leigh didn't have two-factor authentication and therefore she's to blame. We need to be holding these technology companies to account to ensure that they are really thinking about what harm could come from bad actors using their technologies and designing in features to ensure that those harms are prevented.
Who needs to do more, do you think, Leigh? I mean, we've touched on it there, haven't we? Is it the big platforms, the big companies? A lot of the excuses that I'm sure you're well aware of, John, people will say, you know, it's too complicated, it's too expensive, it's too time-consuming. A lot may not admit it affects their bottom line. What more needs to be done, do you think?
I think there's two things we're looking at. We're looking at on websites that exist that shouldn't exist, and I think there's a responsibility that web hosts have to not allow these websites in particular to exist because they're just created to cause harm and to publicly shame individuals for their personal lives. So you've got certain websites out there that no one knows who runs them, no one knows who owns them. And then you've got social media that is an ongoing conversation and has been for a long, long time. And there's a certain platform that is getting worse at the moment, and it's a platform for 13-year-olds. But if you go on the platform and you're scrolling, you come across pornography, and it just appears. And that's speaking from someone who's scrolling, and I appear on that platform, and I can't get it taken down. They said it doesn't breach any privacy, and it's me. I don't want myself on your platform, and I don't think any 13-year-old should be scrolling on a social media platform and free, accessible, illegal pornography or crime appears on their site.
And we agree with that, absolutely. And we're doing a lot of work actually at the moment enforcing the Children's Code, looking at video sharing platforms, social media, gaming, where children and people under 13 should be able to enjoy those safely without coming across that kind of content. And so we're actually out there investigating those platforms and finding it and taking action.
Okay. I've got a couple of questions from the audience. Jenny's submitted a question. Jenny, there you are. Jenny's at the front. If you want to stand up, the microphone will find you. Here it comes. You've got to be fast with that boom. Jenny, what was your question for our panel?
It's a question for John. Do you think the much-delayed online safety bill will give you adequate powers to help in cases like Leigh?
Thank you. Thanks for the question, because it's a really important one. The online safety bill has been working its way through the lawmaking process, and it's now going through Parliament. It will provide remedies for people who are the victims of harmful content online. And that's really important. It won't provide me with powers. That law is going to be administered by Ofcom. And it's quite interesting, though, because the line between content and data is so blurred at times. Recently, there was a coroner's hearing into the tragic death of a young woman called Molly Russell. And the coroner heard evidence about some of the very traumatic content that she was presented with. Now, under the online safety legislation, that content and whether it should have been there will be something that Ofcom can consider under that law. Whereas the kind of use of personal information, the data that drove the algorithms that presented more and more harmful material to that young woman, that's data protection. So we'll be working really closely with Ofcom to make sure that legislation does what it's intended to do and keeps people safe online. Thank you.
Great question. We've got one come in on Twitter from Glenn, who's watching. He says, is legislation falling behind technology when it comes to data and privacy?
Is it falling behind?
Yeah.
It's always a race. I think the great benefit of our law, this GDPR and the other associated laws, is that they're technology neutral, Sarah Jane. So they're set at sort of high-level principles. That gives them the flexibility to adapt. Let me give you an example. We've recently had a look at some technology which is supposedly able to tell what people's emotional state is through biometrics. And on the basis of that, screen people out from recruitments, job ads, and recruiting processes. We've looked at it. We've got experts. They say it doesn't work. It's nonsense. Okay. So taking that evidence, we can say that that's unlawful because it's disproportionate, it's not fair, it's not delivering what it said on the box, and it's making an inappropriate use of data. And that's brand new technology, but the law is capable of still regulating that.
Okay. Neck and neck in that race, then, we'll say. Just time for one final question. Lauren is in the audience. Lawrence, do you want to stand up? Lauren, stand up and show us where you are. Just at the front there, perfect. And Leigh, you can answer this one. Lauren, what's your question?
I actually had two. Oh, two. So easy one was, do 13-year-olds possess the capacity to keep themselves safe online?
Okay, so do 13-year-olds possess the capacity to keep themselves online, do you think? Because you mentioned that as an age bracket for social media and various platforms. Do you think 13-year-olds can do that?
I think it comes down to families and what they're comfortable with, and I think it depends how open families are with each other, because adults know a little bit more, believe it or not, than 13-year-old kids, and I know that sometimes 13-year-olds assume that they know more than the adults, but I think you need to be ready as a family, and you need to be willing to communicate about online harms, about trolling, about bullying, having the right security on your... If you can't put the right security on these platforms to start with, you're not ready to be on social media. If you can't have your account on private, message requests shut off, hide your full name, because you're only 13, there's no need to have your real name on these platforms, so no one should be able to identify you. So I think it comes down to individual basis and depend on your household. But I do think it's still very young to be making potentially big decisions and posting things that could come back to haunt you in 10 years' time, whether it's slightly embarrassing, silly comments that unfortunately now we're seeing coming back around and people being punished for those.
Yeah, it's about being open and discussing it as a family. You talk to your children about not talking to strangers when they go out, for the day in town, but not as many people realise that, online as well, there are dangers out there. I know you've got a second question, but we don't have time. However, do you want to come and ask the panel when we come off stage? You can ask them directly. OK, Lauren, we'll do that for you. John Edwards, Information Commissioner, and Leigh Nichol, Crystal Palace footballer, thank you so much for talking today. Leigh, in particular, for sharing your experience. Thank you so much.